station in New York.
Hour. Really, see, look at, hold it there now, shh. You see, the thing about life is no one ever really knows what to expect. Everyone pretends he knows what to expect. They print timetables and schedules. We have things called TV Guide. How would you like to be guided through life by TV Guide? Down through the world of the Beverly Hillbillies and through the Medic. Hold on, just a minute. Shh, shh. We're going to be on the air in just 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Go. Excelsior, you better Ladies and gentlemen, we're holding a practice demonstration here tonight. Wouldn't it be great now if at this moment 14,000 guys march in off of Sheridan Square blowing horns, throwing confetti in the air, holding up great big signs that say Shepherd for President. Take that, Goldwater. No, as a matter of fact, you know, since this is the eve of a giant political convention, and we Americans are about to undertake another one of our great historical every 4-year rituals, it's very difficult, you know, for people outside of America to understand this. Really, they don't have political conventions like this in, say, France. They don't have them like this in England, not this kind. And we in America are going to have our big thing beginning tomorrow night. It all starts. It's a fantastic thing. In fact, one thing must be said before we go any further. Many Americans just think it's a big TV show. You know, just got a big, what a fantastic audience participation show. Have you ever watched any of those demonstrations? Well, as an old fan of political conventions, and having been inside radio for a long time, TV, you get close to things which most people only see. And I'll never forget one night on a radio station out in the Midwest. I mean, this is the show tonight. The first half, at least, is going to be about this historical thing that we're about to undertake. You know, you hear all these guys talking about conventions and about what this political candidate says about this issue. I wonder whether any of us ever elect anybody on what he says about any issue. I'm serious. I'm curious about that. And one night in a radio station, I'm sitting with a couple of other guys, and we're listening to all the candidates. And they come into the studio, you know, all big candidates before an election, particularly the eve of the election, buy all the time they can lay their hands on. TV, radio, billboards, the whole business. Because they feel, you see, that if you go to sleep just before you hit the sack for the day of the big election, that the guy that got the last word in your skull will score tomorrow morning, because the American electorate doesn't remember much longer than that, you know. He just hears the last word. Oh, yeah, that's a name I remember. Boing. He walks out. And the proletariat has spoken again. You know, have you ever wondered that great expression, 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong? Whereas any good French historian will tell you they've rarely been right. Just the way it goes, you know. You get 50 million guys, oh yeah, I remember that name, going, oh boy. Well, one night in this radio station, we had all these candidates coming in. It was a big election. In fact, it was a senatorial election. There were thousands of candidates, you know. And by the way, many of the greatest candidates, and I'd love to see a documentary done on this, are the candidates that are like the little static in between the big stations, you know, little noises way out. Like there was one guy who was running on the support for the cauliflower farmers party. There is a vegetarian party candidate, you know that, who feels that if he could convert the rest of the world to blackstrap molasses and a clean colon, there would be no wars. This is the alimentary theory, you see, of... That's spelled with an A, friends, for those of you. You better explain what it means out there. Well, all these guys arrive, you see, and the big candidates do too. And so one night, and I'm going to tell you some things that I suppose you never hear talked about in connection with political campaigns. We might as well talk about them once in a great while. And everybody will think you're doing fantasies. Whenever you tell what really happens, people think you're making it up. So that's how we get by with it, in case you're wondering. So one night, big election, we're all sitting in the studio, and one after the other, the candidates arrive with their entourage. Each guy comes in with 17 men with hats pulled down. Sort of, you know, have you ever noticed politicians are all sort of big and husky? There's a certain bulk about them, certain solidity about them. Even when they're little guys, they're bulky, you know. Oh, yeah, they all come striding in, and they've got their speeches, and they've got everything all set and all prepared to go. And we're in the control room. Now, I don't know whether people really listen to speeches. I wondered whether people sitting on the other end of a radio set or a TV set actually listen to the speeches. They're fantastic. In the real use of that word, by the way, in case you're interested. Pure fantasy. It's like watching a giant blimp get bigger and bigger. And this blimp gets bigger and bigger, and it's got stars and stripes and spangles, and it's got sequins on it. And it's directed at one thing as it sails over carrying its bombs. The bad guys. The other guys. Have you noticed all political parties are based on one interesting concept? There are good guys and there are bad guys. And whatever party you're in is the good guy party. The other guys either are terribly misguided or they're selfish louts who won't see the real truth. And so one night we're sitting in the studio there listening to the speeches. And about 8 o'clock, and at midnight, they had a rule that you can't go past midnight with the speeches, because that started election day, you know. There's a law about that. So here it's 8 o'clock, and they're all in there, millions of guys coming in there, coming in and out. They're buying every available inch of time. We canceled every show. And every last political candidate for the Senate, by the way, this was the U.S. Senate, and they were running for mayoralty, they were running for representative, they were running for sheriff, they were running for, oh, you know, just running. You know, guys just come in, I'm running, you know, I want to get in. By the way, I wonder how many guys, wouldn't that be a great political candidate that just comes in, I want to get in, I've been out all my life, I want in. You can't fight City Hall, I want to be City Hall. Well, by the way, that's the basis of it all, in case you're interested. And so, I'm listening to all these guys, and one of my engineers, sitting there, he had a sardonic sense of humor, began to note how many times various phrases were used, identical phrases, by opposing candidates. And he'd write them down, like, I believe in all good men and the dignity of labor as well as the freedom of capital. He writes that down. He'd put, you know, like you're playing tic-tac-toe, he'd go ding, 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 you know, each guy. So he began to compile this list, and about 9:30 he came to me and he says, you know, Shep, this is a fantastic list. He says, I now have the all-inclusive political speech. He has compiled a surefire speech. And so that night, after all of the electioneering had been done, he and I got together, and at midnight my show came on. Now, my show usually came on with a theme, you know, the whole thing. Just you've heard it. It comes out with a theme, and this is start out. Instead, this night, at midnight, we gave the station break. There was a slight pause, and then he ran in on the turntable. The sound of a vast crowd mumbling in some hall. You know that tremendous sound? We take you now to the $1 Million Pier at Atlantic. We just let it go for about 3 minutes, you know, and everybody says, what the heck is this? I think, and then he ran in the sound of a tremendous crowd applauding, an enormous auditorium full of people. And there's a great applause, and then way back from the microphone, I'm standing about 30 feet, and I start to say, "Hello, delegates! Hello, delegates!" Boom, boom, boom with the hammer. "Hello, delegates! I stand before you tonight, a man honored beyond all comprehension. A man who stands before you tonight, privileged, indeed honored, to speak for a truly great American. The next President of the United States." Hey! Fantastic applause. We brought that in. We kept that in for at least 5 minutes. And then we faded it out in the crowd, you know, boom, boom, with the gavels. Please return your seats. Will the delegates return to their seats? Please clear the aisles. I stand before you tonight, privileged to place in nomination before this great body of august statesmen who have gathered today to make known the wishes of the American people. Fantastic applause. It went on and on and on. I stand here tonight, a man humbled by the destiny that has been placed in these poor, simple human hands. I tell you, I have been associated with my candidate for over 45 years, a friend of labor, a man who understands the problems of capital, a man who recognizes the right of all men to freedom and dignity and justice. By the way, if you want to see how it worked, I will cue you when the applause should come in. So give me fantastic roaring applause. We're all set, gang? And now, as we stand on this eve of a historic election, as America faces a crossroads, I know that this group of men gathered here tonight in great convention conclave will make the right decision for all Americans. Please clear the aisle. Clear the aisle. Please clear the aisle. Will the delegates return to their seats? Thank you. And as I stand before you, a humble American, I ask all Americans everywhere to cast aside all considerations of party, all selfish considerations, because America stands at the crossroads, and if they do that, and I have every faith, every conviction that the American people, in their infinite wisdom, will make the right choice. And when they make that choice, they will elect the man who tonight we are about to select the next President of the United States. I thank you, I thank you. May I have some water, please?
Little water, please. Will the delegates return to their seats? There have been many unfair charges made. Many evil men who would prefer to see our country go down the drain for their own selfish, cynical reasons. But I know, just as well as I know, that I am an American, and that all of us gathered here tonight are Americans. I know that this august group of men, selected by party conclave from all over these wonderful United States of America, will not be misled by these lying, deceitful men who would wrest from this group of people here tonight the American flag and carry it to foreign shores, and we won't allow them, will we? And so, I say to you, wherever you might be, and I say to you gathered tonight in this great convention hall, that we stand on the brink of a historic decision. We stand now, men, at the crossroads of history. And what we shall do here tonight could very well decide the fate of the Western countries, nay, indeed, the world, for centuries to come. And so, I place in nomination the name of a sterling stalwart American who has been fighting evil, deceit, who has been fighting those underground forces which are always out to wrest from the American people their sacred heritage of freedom, their sacred, nay, indeed, I say, their God-given, beauteous, wondrous, and almost, and I can't tell you, friends, tonight how I'm carried. I'm just going to have to beg your forbearance. That emotional scenes have no place where men are gathered to make a momentous decision. And so I place tonight in nomination the name of a man, a great American, That's exactly the way the radio show went. For 1/2 hour, we never mentioned the name of the candidate. We used all available cliches. And as we placed the name in nomination, and the band marched in, we had a fantastic band record of bands, people yelling and hollering and throwing bombs and screaming. It got higher and higher until finally we just went right off the air. And they never did hear the name of the man who was nominated. We got over 5,000 calls for people who said, I want to vote for him. Who is he? Probably right now, WOR is swamped. Now, you know what's interesting, though, about it is that we will get, next week, 642 angry letters from Republicans, 647 angry letters from Democrats, 422 angry letters from socialists, all claiming we did a rotten, underhanded satire on their own candidate.
This actually happened in a radio station, as you saw it happen here tonight. And you notice the feeling, the great feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach when you're allowed to applaud just out of the blue. I think this is a very significant attitude in mankind, this desire to cheer, this desire to be part of something. I'm going to tell you one other. Do you want to hear another election story? Yeah. Now that we're on the subject of elections. By the way, what radio station is this? Yes, the station that loves you, George. The concerned station, the John Gambling station. Well, for those of you who are interested, there are 7 John Gamblings. And WOR has a supply of gamblings that are going to last well into the 21st century. We're all set. They're now in their 6th generation. But one of the greatest things that I ever saw happen in an election, and working in a radio station down in the grassroots, you really experience it, and you see it raw, stripped of all the phoniness and all the jazz. When you see Huntley and Brinkley, Cronkite, all those cool cats sitting out there commenting, you'd think that there was a parallel between elections and some kind of a giant space shoot. Everything is under control, and they have machines. Have you noticed that we have an idea now that machines somehow make the elections more official? And less, how shall I say, less tenuous, less shifty. In fact, I know doctors who have placed machines. I have a friend who is a doctor who placed 5 big machines in his office. Diathermy was one. Never uses it. Got dust, he keeps them polished. He says it gives his patients a feeling of security. This is an official doctor, he's got a lot of meters and stuff. And he comes over and hits them, actually says, "How's it feel, Charlie?" It's okay. But if he stands back of the machine, somehow, you feel better about it. Well, actually, the machine is playing a big thing in politics, but don't think for a minute that it is any different than it was. It's just different kinds of machines. And I'll tell you a story that happened in a radio station, and it was in a town in the Midwest. I was innocent, as most of us are all the way through our lives, very innocent. I just wonder how many people, who made the great comment? There was a great line once written about the innocent. Who was it? The line said roughly this: the innocent are very rare, and since they are very rare, they don't meet often. But when they meet, there are dead bodies all around them. Well, this is true, in a lot of ways. And so I'm an innocent person. And I got a job. Of course, I just gotten out of the Army. It was one of my first jobs in radio. And I was working in a station in a tank town. A real tank town, boy. And I mean in the term tank. Every Saturday night it staggered, Real up, down. That's where the expression came from, And every election they had in this town, right across the line, there was a state line, ran right through the town. And this side of the state line was pure and innocent, composed of a town and a state where the taverns closed at 10 every night. And knee-high orange was considered a very strong beverage. Now, right across the street, across the state line, was another state. And you never saw such a sinful cesspool of human passions. Right across the street, the entire town is nothing but joints, swingers, chicks up on the table dancing with little stuff hanging on their ears, tassels flying, guys yelling and hollering and staggering up and down the street. the entire town was devoted to one thing, S-I-N, in capital letters. Well, of course, I'm in the good side. I'm on the other side of town. And it was on the other side of town where the radio station was. It covered both towns. Now, there was an election that was held every year in the Sin Town. Now, the Sin Town, by the way, had, at one point, Life magazine did a piece on them. And it said that in this town of about 8,000 people, and this is a fact, there were 647 taverns. Now, they didn't only sell beer, they sold the whole works, everything. Anything that can be bought anywhere in the world was on sale there. In spades, boy, all the way. You'd get down and you could feel the streets jiggling, you know. And the town that I lived in would look at night over there and feel cheated. And you'd see that glow in the sky over there, you know, and you'd be in this town and everything is dark, you know, and people are pushing little baby carriages around, and guys are walking down the street with ties on, and you could hear at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're laying in your sack there with the maple trees and the little, you know, birds out there asleep, you'd hear the other town. You know, just a steady once in a while you woo! And you know that cry of the human being in the extremis of passion. That woo! It really gets them down there in the dark, you know. And so naturally there would be periodic campaigns on the part of the good town to do away with the bad town. And the bad town just went on, you know, yelling and hollering and hitting each other in the eye and screaming. And every couple of minutes you woo! Well, they had an election every year there. And every human condition finds two groups of peoples arrayed against one another. There are the swingers and there are the other guys. Now, the balance of power shifts from time to time. And in general, I would say that the swingers have got the best lines. I have suspected that the old phrase that the devil has all the best lines in the theater is absolutely true, as it is in life. Can you imagine me up here running for office with this fiendish beard? And I look down on all of you, see. I'm the devil, Mephistopheles. I look down on all of you and I say, friends, you all know that I'm running for an important office, right? I'm going to give to each one of you. And I'm going to see that all the people who elect me can do that thing which they've always wanted to do. What is it, friends? You don't even have to spell it out, you know. And boy, you ought to hear the ballots going when that one hits. Well, you see, over across town, there was this clean division. There were the reformers and there were the hollerers. Now, the hollerers had all the best of it because everybody in town, with just a very few exceptions, worked in these joints. I mean, you know, you got a town full of nothing but strip teasers, guys that are running the tables, you know, dice players, drinkers and hollerers. That's the major issue. And incidentally, their chief source of business was the other town. It is true. The other town consisted of nothing but steel workers. Now, I don't know whether you have seen the 4 to 12 shift from the open hearth and the blast furnace from the big steel mill in the dead of winter come home heading towards this little safe, quiet trundle bed at 12:30, passing through a gigantic cesspool of sin. They get off those buses en masse with their lunch buckets and they go in. Well, within 10 minutes, you never saw anything like it, yelling and hollering and fist fighting, and 3.5 hours later, they go staggering home after a hard day at the mill. They really do. And their wives ask him, well, how come you were late? Of course, he's got 4 eyes across his thing.
We had an explosion in the mill.
You know, with a bottle hit him on the side, his clothes torn off, you know. She says, but you smell funny. He says, that's what they use in the fire extinguishers. You know, this is the way man always is. So every year there'd be a big election, and the reform guys would come on. You see, there'd be all kinds of ministers and reverends and people of good thought would come on, and they would try to get the rest of the town to go straight. They would say, do you realize the evil and the corruption that exists in this city? And you could just hear that unspoken applause. 8 million people applauding evil, corruption, and sin. You know what I always say? I always say, if you're a reformer and you want to get in, promise them even more and greater and exotic sins. And once you get in, turn the screws all off, you know. Turn it off. Turn off all the faucets and they wouldn't know what hit them. But whenever you go to a sinner and tell him that he should be on your side because you're going to do away with sin, forget it. And so year after year, these poor guys would come in and give speeches. Well, I'm a kid, you know. I don't know anything about all this up to this point. And so one day, I get home from the Army, and I'm working in this radio station. And about 3 or 4 days before the election, my boss comes in. And by the way, this was a 2-man radio station. There was one announcer that came on at 7 and worked till he fell over. And I would pick him up and throw him out in the hall and work the rest of the night, you know, just doing everything. Newscasts, man on the street, I'd sing, dance, everything. I had about 7 names and about 15 voices. And so, no, this is truth. And so the boss called his staff in, me and Charlie. And he says, now, you know, we're going to have complete coverage of this election. And he says, we're going to be absolutely fair. He says, we're in the business of communicating with the public. We're responsible. And Charlie's sitting there nearsighted, you know, with his glasses busted. Yes, that's right. And I'm sitting over there, yes. All of a sudden you begin to feel, you know, I'm part of this great republic. I'm part of it all. You know, you can feel history marching, and suddenly they've called for you to join Hannibal's army. And I'm here. And he said, now look, there will be men come in here to give their speeches. Each one of you treat them with respect. We want you to listen carefully. Don't laugh in the control room. Not like last time. And by the way, that's always what happens. You ought to see some guy sitting in the control room when some candidate's in there, all of a sudden he disappears. You know? Have you ever noticed those long pauses in speeches? Well, he says, now look, we've got this coming in, and he says, now, the reform candidates are coming in. Treat them as if they're sincere. Especially when they talk about sin. I don't want you bringing any beer in on those nights. None of that stuff. Now, you all said any questions? We both sit. We're Americans. We've both been in the Army, you know. We've seen it all. We know about American democracy. We had civics classes at Hammond High, you know. It's funny how we take these civics classes, and they never tell you about DeSapio in them, you know. Or Robert Moses, you know. Have you ever read a little simple description of how democracy works? How simple. All the people parade, you know, they elect and they decide and they have conventions. So simple. Except when it gets into actual operation. And so the big night arrived. Now these were all little local candidates. They didn't have a lot to spend. And they want to put it in the right spots. And so they all tried to get the spot right behind the big request program. you know, with all the music and stuff, just before the news, and it's supper time, when everyone was home. And so guess who is on duty? No, Charlie had seniority. Charlie had left 10 minutes before the first guy with the frock coat arrived. Charlie had seen it, you know, and so he's gone. And so I'm sitting in there. It was my first election. And I felt very important. My engineer is sitting in the next control room. And I'm the announcer. It was my job to say, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you tonight an address by the Right Honorable Stanley L. Wisniewski, who is running for the post of alderman of the 7th Ward. He does not necessarily represent the views of the management. And Stanley would come in and read his speech. And of course, I had this feeling that I was Bo Carter or somebody important. And so the first guy arrived, and I'm sitting in the control room waiting. And he came in, and he's this nice little man. Now, we all know good men. Really serious. And immediately I recognized that here was the kind of... we had an uncle, as a matter of fact, like that. I had an uncle who had a little thin mustache. And he had this faint gray hair from the time he was 10. Yes, Uncle Fred always looked like he was about to cry. He was a pure, good man. You know it. It shone right out of his eyes. Well, Uncle Fred came in. Only it was somebody else's Uncle Fred. You know, I recognized him. He came in there, and he has 3 other little Uncle Freds with him. And they've got their little speech, and they have bought a half hour of time. Now, I don't know how many pennies contributed by each little right thinker in the town it took. How many strawberry festivals? How many penny suppers? Till finally they bought a whole half hour. Now that was $18 in this radio station. They were going all out, you know. They were reaching the electorate. It's at supper time. That's Class A time, you know. And so he walked in, and I'm sitting in the control room. He came up to me and he said, "Mr. Shepherd?" And I said, "Yes." He says, I'm a little nervous. I've never been on the radio before. And I said, "Well, that's all right. I'm here." I'd been on a good, cool 4 weeks. See? And I said, "I'm here." And he said, "Well, if I lose my place or anything, you don't mind if I fumble it? It's still around." I said, No, you go right in there. We're here. It's all right. Nobody notices." And so he goes in, and I said, "Watch for my cue. When you're ready to go, I'll point to you." And so the time came, 6:30, and I came on with my big voice, and I say, "Ladies and gentlemen, we now bring you a candidate on the reform ticket who is here to speak to you of their ideals and their aims in the forthcoming election, which will be held tomorrow beginning at 8 a.m. The candidate is the Right Reverend Stanley L. Wisniewski of the 17th Unitarian Church. His views do not necessarily represent those of the management. And now, here is the candidate." And this little man stands and he looks at me, and I could see in his eyes that look of a tiny rabbit with a gigantic Capital Limited on the B&O line approaching with all its steam up. He looks. He had 7 eyes while I looked, you know. And I kept pointing. "Electorate, fellow citizens, I can't tell you the sin and the corruption that is rampant in our fair city. And I stand before you tonight, a candidate on the reform ticket." And as he talks, he went further and further. And he was using a different speech than the one he had given to me before he went on the air. The one he gave me before he went on was one of these speeches, you know, with the nice little platitudes. It says, like, "We believe in the freedom of man," and all that stuff. And now he is saying, "Charlie L. Watson is no good. He hits his 9-year-old daughter And I'm standing in there, and my engineer, here's this little man. Well, he goes for it, but we don't know what, you can't run in and grab it. Come on, let's go. Back on a script about the things about freedom and all that, Well, he starts laying it down. He says, do you know that the Riptide is run by a bunch of thieves? The Riptide was the big local nightclub that was operated by a guy named Smokey Joe. Smokey Joe had been one of Al Capone's ace trigger men. And Smokey was given this as a kind of retirement present, see? The town. I'm telling you the truth. Smokey ran this town. You know those pictures in the Allstate TV commercials? Well, those two big hands were Smokey's, It's too bad, wouldn't it be great to do a takeoff on that TV commercial? Two big claws. Well, there, and he says, Smokey Joe and Greasy Thumb Goosick every night above the Riptide, and he's going on like this. Well, we're panic-stricken in there, The truth is coming out, Hardly anybody says the truth in a campaign speech. When all of a sudden I notice outside of the studio, these were big glass studios, you see, and a big glass, I see 6 guys in black overcoats. So help me, I am not inventing it. I'm telling you the truth. 6 guys in overcoats with, those white hats that snap down that they all wear in the Jimmy Cagney movies, and they're all standing there looking in, see? And the Reverend is going on in there, and he finally finishes his speech. And he's 6 or 7 guys are in a little knot. It's pineapple shaped. And they're all standing there. You'll have to explain that one later. I picked pineapple for its symbolic reasons. And they're all standing there looking through this glass. And this actually happened. And I don't know what to do. And they're knocking. They're knocking on the glass. And a little man is in there reading, and he takes one look back, and he sees sin. Sin has arrived to speak its piece. Well, that's pretty tough. A guy with a pulpit is not used to the devil saying, wait a minute, equal time here. Well, he took one look, and I take him off the air, and I say, that was the Reverend so-and-so, the reform candidates. There's a little shake in the voice. And I say, we now bring you 15 minutes of transcribed organ music. And on came Ave Maria. And my engineer's in there, he's white as a sheet, and he's got a whole, and I go into him and I say, who are these guys? And he's speechless. He's sitting there, this guy lived in this town for 48 years, and I'm just a new guy in this radio station. I don't know anything about life. He says, it's Smokey Joe. I mean, Smokey Joe was legendary. There he is, It's like seeing Sidney Greenstreet in person, comes in to raid the joint. I said, Smokey Joe, what does he want? He says, you know what he wants. I said, no, I don't. He said, you're going to find out. Well, the little Reverend comes into the control room, and he says, was I good? Was I good? You don't know what to say. It's too late. He said it, and I says, yes, Reverend, pay me the money. He gives me $18 in pennies and quarters, and he goes out the back way. And there we are. Well, luckily, there was no way for Smokey Joe to get in the studio. We had these doors that only work one way. You should know this town. You'd know why. I'm telling you, they did. They only worked one way. You can only get in out like that, or if there was a little release, like in the bank, when you press the button, it buzzes, you let him in, see? So he's out there banging like that, looking in there, 7 guys looking in there, banging on the glass. And I'm in there trying to do, and now Dinah Shore sings for the benefit of all of you kids out there. Boom, 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 the glass. Dinah Shore, he wants to talk, Well, he's banging, and finally I get up and I walk to the glass when there's a record on. I say, "What do you want?" And he says, "Give me the boss." "Who's the boss?" Well, I don't know whether you know. Wait just a minute, fellas. I don't know whether you know that when the announcer is on duty, now give me your attention. No, they're all right. This isn't Greasy Thumb's gang. Whenever the announcer is on duty, he is in charge. I'm the boss. And I say, "Yeah, I'm the boss." He pulls back. "Come out of there." I said, "What do you want?" He says, "I want to buy all the rest of the time on a radio station. Don't let none of them guys get on, them soreheads." I said, "You want to buy the rest of the station all night?" He said, "Yeah, how much is it?" And I rushed back in and I called the manager of the station. I said, "There's a guy outside wants to buy all the time till midnight. He wants to buy every last minute." And he says, "Who?" He thought at long last a sponsor, you know. I say, it's Smokey Joe. And there's this long, pregnant pause. He says, "Give it to him." I say, "How much do I charge him?" He says, "Give it to him! Quit arguing! Give it to him!" I say, "Okay." And I go to the door and I say, "You're on in 2 minutes, Smokey Joe." He says, "Play records." He said, "I want to just say one thing." I said, "Okay." I said, "Do you have a script?" "Script!" Smokey Joe goes in the studio and he stands in front of the microphone with his coat on. And I turn the mic on and he says, "This is Smokey Joe. You hear me?" And everybody in town, you know, they drop their hamburger. He said, "You're going to vote tomorrow at 8 o'clock. You know who you're going to vote for. This is Smokey Joe. I'll see you tomorrow at the polls. Good night." And speaking of thugs, this is the shiftless gang from the Red Garter right down the street. And they arrive every week, every Saturday night down here to the Limelight just to sit here and blow. So blow, man, let's go.
This is WOR Radio, your station for news. Wondering where to go on your vacation? Plan ahead with up-to-the-minute information in the Sunday Journal American's Midsummer Vacation issue. Whether you decide on a vacation at home or abroad, here are the tips you need on where to go and how to get there. See the resort and travel pages in Sunday's Journal American. WOR AM and FM New York. When it comes to covering political conventions, there's more going on than meets the eye. Out in San Francisco, conventions fall before the wit of Walter Kiernan. That's news. That's radio. That's WOR, your RKO General Station in New York.
That they don't dare to report. It hangs on the edge of the precipice. Everywhere, the great frozen food department of the universe, with its frozen broccoli, its frozen minute steaks of passion, hangs in the balance, waiting for the symbolic horn to call them forward to... Once more, Marty. Very good. They wait for their cue. All of mankind has always been waiting for its cue. Have you ever had the feeling that you are some forgotten actor in a gigantic pageant where everybody has great lines and a fantastic script, and you have been just told to get out and ad lib?
and they say ad lib on cue, and then they forget to tell you what the cue is. And it seems that all the rest of them got the cue. You know, there was a point in time when Robert Moses was just a little baby. A little tiny baby, a little 7.5-pound bit of human flotsam floating on the great sea of life. And around him, growing up at the same time, were thousands of little bits of human flotsam. He got the cue. And all the rest are just paying their way through the turnstile to buy those rubber hot dogs, that weak root beer, and to stand in line before the Bell telephone exhibit where even the phones don't work. Yeah, did I tell you that I stood in line? I finally got in there, and they had this big thing about phones, and it says, pick up a phone and hear the story of Bell telephone service. And I picked up the phone, and it wasn't working. I'm serious. There was a little sign that says, temporarily out of order. Wait till they hang that sign on the earth. All right, gang, here comes your cue. Excelsior, you fathead! Very good, very good. We're back here at the Limelight. And where is the Limelight, friends? In the village! We're here in the Limelight in the heart of Circleville, Ohio, friends. Yes, where east meets west and where coal meets iron and where all folks are happy tonight, down at the Limelight, right at the corner of 7th and Main. If you're listening, drive straight out the Ohio Turnpike, turn left at the Indiana Turnpike, cross the state of West Virginia and head down, and then turn left again at Indianapolis, and you're there! Hooray! Well, I don't know, you know, it's funny, since we're now here dealing with a great national election which is about to occur, maybe I shouldn't tell you the next incident that occurred in my somewhat spotty education in existence. A few years later, after I left the employ of Smokey Joe, and I had learned that right doesn't necessarily make might. Yes, indeed. Yes, I certainly learned that. You notice this, how this ear here is lower than the other one? I'll never forget one night I'm on the air doing a show, and the program, I thought it was a fantastic show, and the program director came in and grabbed this one and pulled it down. And he said, look out, Smokey's listening tonight. And he's been listening ever since. And I don't know whether or not to tell you this story, but in that same radio station where the program director came in and grabbed a hold of my cauliflower ear and let me know who was boss, there was a great election. You see, all of us in radio and in television have lived through these events far more dynamically than the reader or the listener or the viewer does. You know, after all, you're out there fooling around all the time and trying to get the car door work, and you know, you mess around at Nedick's and all those places, and all the while we're out there dealing with life and facts. We're trying to get to the candidate. We're trying to get to where the crash occurred. We're trying to be where the occasion is occasioning. Always. That is our whole world, you see. And so after a while, you learn something that the public never quite does learn. So many things are incredibly accidental. Do you realize that the men that are running for president can never really tell you how they got there? I mean, really, Johnson, you know, President Johnson was just a school teacher. I mean, he's down there trying to teach algebra to a bunch of knuckleheads. And a whole lot of little things fit together, and the next thing you know, he's the president. That is a fantastic thing. I mean, one of the leading candidates was operating a dry goods department in a big store. And the next thing you know, millions of people are listening to him. Goldwater. Oh, really? I'm serious. And suddenly he becomes a man who seems to know all about the world. a whole series of fantastic accidents go together. We all start out, kind of fat and full. All babies are fat, fat and rubbery and, kind of wet and squishy, smelly. And life consists, and this is something nobody wants to believe, really, it consists of a whole series of inexplicable accidents that lead finally, inevitably, to wherever you happen to be at this instant. Now, you don't know what accidents are going to occur to you between now and the next 2 weeks that will lead you where. What brought you here, Whole bunch of funny little things. You could have been at Sardi's, where it's really happening. Look at you. I could have been on the Tonight Show. I could have been born Johnny Carson with talent. Either that or a good agent. I don't know which. That is talent, I guess. But look here I am down here deep in the bowels of Greenwich Village. Down here in the lower elementary canal. Down here at the Limelight. Trying to fight my way through this eternal, gigantic Caro syrup sea of existence. Swimming underwater like all the rest of us in a sort of loose formation, by the way, called mankind. And the rest of those guys, the great accidents happen. The great, fantastic accidents. Well, the little man, all of us, and I think this plays a great role in accidents and in elections and in history. The little man always feels bugged. He always feels as though he really got the business. That the breaks never happened. The accidents never occurred to him. And so he really gets teed off at the guys to whom they apparently did. And so he plots. He plots constantly. Have you ever noticed out there at Yankee Stadium, why do they boo Roger Maris? Well, they boo him because he hit 61 homers. They never booed Hank Bauer, a good solid 230 hitter all his life. They loved him. He was one of them, Let me tell you, if one Met all of a sudden hits 73 homers next year, they're going to be on him. I mean, really, seriously, you really get bugged. And so all of us sit, watching the various candidates, and no matter what our party is, we're kind of teed off. You ever notice that the minute a president gets in, everybody starts yelling right away? 5 minutes after he's in, yeah, you didn't keep your promises, you bum. Yeah, bum. Yeah. 5 minutes after the late President Kennedy was in, the first anti-Kennedy cartoons appeared in The Voice. 5 minutes. He just raised his hand, put it down, and they're writing already, And another thing, too, I suspect that the largest percentage of people always feel guilty as though they feel they don't deserve the breaks. The average guy feels, I'm rotten, I shouldn't get the breaks. Although he pretends, He really does. He pretends that isn't so. Then there is a second group who feels it is a pure, beautiful group to whom the breaks should have happened. These are the guiltless. These are the people who feel absolutely no guilt at all. And they become liberals, usually. Boy, oh boy, each one of them thinks secretly that he should have been president. By the way, I'm a liberal. Just to make sure that you know where I stand, The minute you make a crack about a liberal, everybody says, uh-oh, a John Bircher. It's a fascinating problem. But I can remember one of the great movements that a little man made against the fantastic giant man who had achieved the eminence of all the breaks. The man on the pinnacle. I'm working in a radio station, and the guy who owned the radio station, very remotely, it was one of these big families where they own a whole state, Have you noticed that almost all candidates own a lot of stuff these days? I'm telling you, Lincoln would be thrown out just on the fact that he was a rail splitter. Who listens to guys that rail splitter, for crying out? Who listens to that? I'm serious. In our time, we really do believe that men who have made it financially somehow have a firm grasp on good and evil and are deep thinkers. I'm afraid Smokey Joe was before his time. By the way, he was very rich. So, one time in this radio station, which was owned, like I say, by one of the big candidates, this was a man that was running for president. Really? His name is in history. And he was running for president. He was running for all kinds of big offices. But you know how it is when you work in an office. You hate the boss. And every last guy in the radio station hated this guy's tiniest entrail. And once in a while, there would be a sign would appear on the bulletin board. It would say such things as, "Company Picnic. Mr. Watanabe will appear for a brief address." Your boss. And all the while, we're down in the salt mine slaving and picking away and chopping at the coal, making it possible for him to go on. And there was a slow building up of hate. Not really hate, kind of resentment. You know how most of us feel. We've got it. But very few of us can ever do anything about it except to walk around and say, that bum. Hey, by the way, I wonder how many people pretend that they're going to vote for one guy, and when they get in that thing, with the curtain, they... Yeah. They walk around, and then they sit there in front of their TV set and look worried when the returns are coming in and say, I don't know. Boy, I'm telling you, those polls are really nutty, aren't they? Those polls are really nutty. I'll bet a lot of the people they ask lie to them. Boy. And there sits the liar there watching TV. Well, seriously, this is a problem, really. Well, here we are, our candidate. And we're all loyal. You see, we're supposed to be all absolutely loyal to this man. We had all taken pledges of loyalty. We all had that proper scrubbed look on our face, when the boss is up. And I'll never forget the day the boss came in, and he said, "Men," he said, "you realize that we're on the eve of a very important election. And we're all one happy family here. And when I get elected, it's all of you getting elected. It's all the things that we stand for, you and me." We're all sitting there. We remember the 8 last strikes where nobody got a cent raise. They took the water cooler out, Believe me, it's these issues that settle whole world issues. You say, yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And he says, now I'm going out to get elected, I hope, and I want to know that all of my men who've been with me since I was a little man are still with me. Right, men? Give me a cheer. You'll hear how it sounds. Hooray! Isn't that a sincere cheer? Well, anyway, we walked out, and that was the end of that. Now, he broadcast his speeches through a network that was connecting the entire Midwest. And these speeches were fed to the big national hookups, NBC, CBS. Perhaps you don't know that some little radio station way out in the hinterlands is feeding to the entire nation the speech by Mr. Goldwater or Mr. Scranton, Mr. Johnson, 2 little local announcers and 1 little local engineer, right, Tony, are sitting way down there at the base of it all. Now, you kind of think, I suppose, that it's NBC or CBS. No, there are 2 little guys sitting in the corner just like this. Sneaky little guys. Well, if Tony is feeding this, you see, you notice Tony is picking this up here? He's feeding it back to the studio. I'm going to explain this to you technically. We feed the remote back to the studio, and at the studio, there is another innocent guy sitting by a control board. Who is it, Tony? Who? Pat? Oh, yeah, Matt's down there. Well, he's not so innocent. I know him. Very bad man. I don't know whether this is getting out or not tonight. And he then feeds it out to the transmitter. See, there's just a couple of guys. The public never sees them. And they got sitting next to them these things right here. See, that's a turntable. Sitting right there. It looks very innocent, doesn't it? Well, our candidate was speaking from a city 150 miles from our station. It was being fed back on a telephone line to our little radio station and then fed to the gigantic network all the way across the world. It was being fed to the armed forces. They bought the whole world that night. They had. It was the big radio broadcast. And the candidate was appearing in an auditorium that was filled with partisans, all of his, you see. And he was giving his speech. And we're sitting back in the control room 200 miles away. We're not hearing a great man of history. We're hearing the guy that took the water cooler out. You know? And did that stuff with the vacation schedule. And so we're sitting there, and he says, I'm here tonight, and he had this nice, dry voice of a man of reason and intellect. I'm here tonight speaking on the eve of a great election as a simple American who wants to see that justice and freedom exist for all men. And we can think of that water cooler. Justice and freedom, you know, he knows about it. Justice and freedom. And with that, there was a fantastic, hooray! You know, the crowd is cheering. Whoa! And, you can, and we're sitting there, listen to those guys. Listen to those nuts. Cheering that guy, that idiot. Hooray! They cheer. And all of a sudden, my engineer gets up all by himself. He walks into the next room where we had a great big file cabinet full of transcriptions. He pulls one out, and there they are all lined up. It says, angry crowd, automobile accident. I'm telling you, this is what he did. And so he takes one big transcription out of our sound effects library, and he lays it on the table. And he just sits there. And the great man went on. And he says, and so as I stand before you tonight on the eve of this great election, I am asking the support of all good Americans everywhere. Hooray! And then he quickly puts it on. And you could hear in the crowd all of a sudden, boo! 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 He had put a record on that was labeled 600 Angry Revolutionaries Attacking the Palace. And it was fantastic. It's fed all over, you know. And every time he would open his trap, you'd hear 3 or 4 little cheers, and you'd hear this, boo, kill him, boo, you phony, you bum, boo, boo. And once in a while, you hear a little sound of a machine gun. Well, it was the greatest political speech in history. And 2 nights later, I'll tell you another little thing. 2 nights later, the same candidate was speaking, only this time it was the announcing department's turn to get in its licks. And there was an announcer sitting in the standby booth, just sitting in there, see, and he's listening. And the candidate is going on. You know, and political speakers rarely really know how to speak the way an actor knows how to speak. I think the next generation, and this is a showbiz generation, is going to elect Laurence Olivier. You know, really, I'm serious. I think this generation really would love to. Yeah, Richard Burton. You know, they seriously think that we should have Alec Guinness running the UN, and somehow it'd all fit. You know, they remember the Colonel and the Bridge on the River Kwai and all that stuff, and they try to get, if they could, Elia Kazan to direct operations down there. Well, here is the candidate speaking. He can't speak very well, and he has these great pauses that denote an honest man fumbling for words in his soul. Of course, they were all written down. I remember his scripture. It'd say, pause. Little thing would say, fumble for word. You know? Oh, yeah, you'd be surprised. Then it would say, voice crack at this point. You ought to see candidates working on a voice crack. Oh, yes, you know, that tear that comes in the voice when they're talking about something real and honest, see. So the candidate gets on that night, and he was on. He was really good that night. And he was talking in a nasal voice, and he says, and I believe that all men who are Americans, who really understand America, who feel that the American way of life is the greatest way of life. And we knew there was a pause. It says fumble for words here. My announcer friend at that point would lean forward into the microphone and go, fed all over the world, a big juicy sniff. And then he would go on, you see. He says, and I say, and somehow you got this image of this sniveling, snaggletooth man with a runny nose, you know, standing. And he would go a little further, you see, and my friend would go a little further, see, and my friend would lean forward, and as he would give another one of his pregnant pauses, he would click his teeth on the mic. It sounded like his dentures were loose and slipping around, you know. Well, all I got to say is that this candidate lost by a landslide. But these stories, you see, I'm sure that a lot... Oh, by the way, speaking of landslides and slipping dentures, what radio station is this, gang? Yes, and I wonder what the announcer back at the studio is doing right now. In what town? New Rochelle. All right. Now, the point that I want to make here is that elections swing on things as simple as that. And they swing. There's a whole atmosphere in the world that creates the world we live in. And no one knows it's there. You don't know it, you know. Believe me, in any great movement, no one is aware of it. Do you think that at the time of the Renaissance, guys were walking around saying, gee, isn't it great to be in a Renaissance? Yeah? All the lights are on now, you know. We can... Do you really believe that a guy living in the Dark Ages walking around, geez, I wish they'd turn on the lights, you know? Certainly rotten to be living in the Dark Ages, you know? And I'm sure that we all believe that a caveman knew he was a caveman. You know, he says, well, shut up, will you, Og? After all, it's only the Stone Age. You don't expect me to think, do you? No, we don't know. We never know what age we're in. It's only later on, when the historians write it up, then the ages become known for what they are. Like the knothead age, which we could very well be living in, you know. The mashed potatoes age. Incidentally, can you imagine a guy writing a historical novel about our time 400 years from now? You know, we always invest the past with fantastic glamour. Oh, yes. I mean, how many times have you seen these covers? It's, you know, it shows a guy with a buskin and a bucklet and a flubman. And he's got the leather gauntlets, and he's got this big sword and this big plume, and it says, Lance Courtenay, striding through the swirling, turbulent 17th century. You know, we always do that. Swirling, turbulent, exciting, gay, fantastic, decadent 17th century. And can you imagine them writing a historical novel about you? Charles Witherspoon, striding through the swirling, turbulent, gay, exciting, decadent life of the 20th century. And it shows you in native costume of the period, in your glamorous wash and wear suit, you know, striding into the limelight. A historical member of a historical period in time where things were happening and the world was in ferment. And a man was a man in those days. And you know, that's what they're going to do. They're going to read this and they're going to say, oh, boy, Men were men then. Somehow we're going to have to hide the truth from them, you know? Have you been out here on Greenwich lately, friends? I don't know what that cheer is about. For or against? Which is it? Hey, what? Oh, hear that? That high falsetto voice from the bar? Some guys got rimless glasses on their souls when they're born. Well, I believe that here we are, you know. We never quite know what the world is going to be like, or how it's going to be judged 1,000 years from now. Can you really believe that all those nobles sitting around signing the Magna Carta knew that they were creating the Ed Sullivan Show? Could they really have forecast Jack Parr when they're sitting there signing this thing? And incidentally, how about all those guys walking around with the leather pants, the peasants at that time, you know, with the sheepskin coats? And all these guys are sitting down there signing the big Magna Carta. And one says to the other, let's go down there, signing the Magna Carta, Wamba. With the iron ring, you know, and all the business around here. And he's got this big dog named Wolf or Fang. And the other one says, oh, they're just politicians. I wouldn't go near that stuff. I don't care for that kind of stuff. And incidentally, I think most of us miss the great historical occasions of our time. Really. I really believe this, that most of us go to the wrong places. Can you imagine back in the 1920s in Germany? Here they're sitting around the family. You know, they got a bunch of, well, you know, they got the sauerkraut out and the hot dogs, and somebody's sitting there with the, you know, they got the red cabbage and the goose is going, and they got the beer. And somebody says, hey, listen, how about going tonight down? I have an idea. Let's go down and hear that nut down at the Hofbräu house. That sick comic that's working down there. And somebody says, oh, no, I wouldn't waste my time. This stuff, these fads come and go. That's ridiculous stuff. I'm going down to the opera where the real stuff is happening. And all the while down there is this guy standing up on top of the table. And he's going, hey, put it on my channel. And nobody's listening. No, seriously, that's what happened to him. Nobody listened. I don't think many of us actually ever can understand, many of us, any of us, what we're involved in, if anything. But little sneaky suspicions come through. Yesterday in the New York Times, there appeared a piece which I conveniently brought with me on this eve. And it's just a little piece, you know. It appears back on page 79 underneath the listings of the ships leaving and going. You know, the SS Rotterdam and the SS African Queen and all that stuff. It says here, you see, because the world is literally a piece. The Renaissance affected all men all over the world. It wasn't just Italy, you know. It was everywhere. And so it is our world everywhere in the world. Listen to this great heading. Mexican Museum erects huge idol. Erects huge idol. And under it is the subheading, interest in ancient rain god overshadows elections. Doesn't that sound familiar? Now listen to this. Now wait, don't laugh. Wait till you hear how it goes further on. I suspect that giant stone idols are always elected. Listen, this is an election year in Mexico, and logically, the capital should be concerned with politics. Instead, the attention has been stolen by a great, silent, stone idol. I love that word, silent. Stone idol. The 167-ton pre-Columbian rain and water god, Tlaloc, has finally come to rest in the heavily fortified foundations of the new National Museum of Anthropology. It took more than 2 months of travel and engineering to move it from its resting place of centuries outside of Mexico City and finally set it feet first on its concrete base. How many centuries it had rested lying on its back, no one knows. Just laying there, looking up at the sky, a great stone idol. It could go back to at least the 3rd or 4th century, before Christ, and possibly further. On the night the rain god reached Mexico City, the capital was inundated with the heaviest cloudburst recorded in years. Put that in your cynical pipe and smoke it. And they tell you not to worship idols, huh? Aha! Maybe you've been getting the wrong word. Wise guys. Since then, storms and enormous squalls have been daily occurrences. Yeah. Great amount of newsprint has been used up in the press explaining the phenomenon, or in the case of wise guy cartoonists and columnists, having a circus with the ancient god. Isn't that so like man? Really? I wonder how many disbelievers are in the crowd here tonight who say, oh, come on, I don't believe in that stuff. What would we do if 15 minutes after we leave the Limelight, a gigantic male fist came out of the cloud bearing thunderbolts and destroyed Darien? Boom! As a starter. You know, wouldn't that be a great news item for Lyle Van on the human side of the news? Tonight, a great male fist came out of the clouds and destroyed Darien. And now the weather. The stock market continued uneven today. Now, we laugh at this sort of thing. You know, the ancient Greeks were forever looking up and seeing giant chariots crossing the sky. Now, this is a Saturday night, you know. It's a nervous night, Saturday. Oh, yeah. There's plenty of plans in this crowd tonight. There's a lot of nervousness about it, too, I might add. Yeah. Tomorrow is Sunday. There's going to be a lot of guys laying on their backs out there just flat out on Jones Beach looking up at the sky. You know, the sand is there in the ocean. Everything's under control. They got the little transistor radio there, and they're listening to the Yankees belt somebody out at the stadium, and Mel Allen is talking away there. And all the Ballantine men. Have you seen those Ballantine commercials with those nutty people on those picnics and that? Did you ever see a more manic crowd? Sitting there swilling the beer down and running. Hey, did you see those two guys? You ever see those two guys in that commercial where one guy runs into the water and throws the beer can to the other guy running out of the water? You ought to try that sometime. You know, they rehearsed that for over 7 weeks before it worked. Well, here he is. He's lying out there, you know, and there's 18,000 people all flat out, laying there. Millions. There's a whole crowd down at Coney Island. There's a whole crowd laying outside of the Oak Street Beach in Chicago. There's a bunch of guys at Malibu Beach. Everybody's flat out, looking up into the sky. It's Sunday. When all of a sudden, out of the east, there appears a faint cloud. A cloud that sparkles. There's a few little trailing, wisping, swirling shreds of smoke. And somebody laying there just notices. It's a jet. His eyes go. He looks up again. Looks again. Closes his... Of course, he's got his ear plugged into the Rheingold commercial at this point. Lindsey Nelson is trying to make it sound like the Mets are exciting. And he's laying there, you know, and suddenly out of the east appears a golden chariot. It is arcing its way over the sky. Higher and higher and higher it goes, trailing smoke. And the golden chariot is being pulled by a winged horse, Pegasus. And in the golden chariot is Mercury, sending out a few little lightning bolts. Whee! He arches past Southern California, and they just think it's a Goldwater campaign bit. And it whistles off into the opposite direction. And it suddenly appears over China. And they got the big pictures of Stalin and Lenin, and Mao Zedong and all the other gods of that world. And they're walking around there, you know, being peoples with solidarity. Simple little citizens of a great solidarity movement, chopping away. Next to a picture of Stalin, Mao Zedong, and a guy down there in the rice field looks up. And arching over, going, swishing towards India is a great golden chariot bearing Mercury, the winged god. You ever seen pictures of Mercury? Have you ever seen it? There speaks a true American. He says on a hubcap. I'll never forget in my high school when we were studying American history, poor old Mr. Matson one day brought up the subject of a great American Indian, Pontiac. And all the Ford fans got mad in the crowd, you know. They wanted equal time right away. So that's fascinating. Yes, on a hubcap, Mercury. He's got wings on his head, you know. And he's sailing across the sky, and he finally arrives over Russia. And there, on a great podium in the Kremlin, Khrushchev is striding about. And they cheer. Come on, not yet. He thinks it's another U2. And you know what's so... You can see the little Russian anti-aircraft go ping, 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 ping. And Mercury is catching them like ping pong balls and throwing them up. You know, playing, juggling with the rockets. And it disappears into the night. And the world sits, mulling it over. What would the New York Times say? How would they handle this? Would they blame DeSapio? Or Buckley of the Bronx? How would the Chicago Tribune deal with this? New York and the un-American UN, in a cheap, rotten trick, sent over the Oak Street beach yesterday afternoon? Yes. That's what this stone idol is about. Do you want to hear the rest of it? It goes, all right, just be quiet, son, you'll hear it. Listen carefully here. Yes, it is a good conversation piece which extends to all sectors of the population. While the scientists are gravely discussing its origin, the man on the street has been arguing that the monolith should never have been put on its feet. Never thought of that side of it, did you? He was okay while he was laying down. Just stand him on his feet and bring him into town and put him on a podium and look out. There's interesting parallels here. It says he's arguing that maybe they ought to take it back out of town and restore him to his original prone condition. There is another group that argues that this could even be more dangerous. Now, wait a minute. This is the 20th century. These are not... Your laugh. Listen to them laugh. Ha, 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 ha. Ha, 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 ha. Oh, yes, indeed. Goes even further. Yes, a dentist commanded 2 columns in a morning Mexico City newspaper recently discussing whether the idol's facial formation was male or female. There's another little side issue there. The great lady god has arrived on the scene. And it's going to take over where Arthur Miller stopped. Look out. Statistically, you want to hear now, see, man always reduces it to simple statistics. If you know your God is only 46 feet high, somehow that seems a little less dangerous. Statistically, the rain and water god, in addition to weighing 167 tons, is 24.6 feet high and 13.1 feet wide. Sounds like Smokey Joe. I know this guy. It was originally reported to have been carved from unquarried rock where it was found, although archaeologists don't even agree on this point. It is an unknown rock. As with all great archaeological treasures, this one abounds in legends. Now, I have to explain to you what the word legend means. That's a cop-out. Anything you don't want to believe in is called a legend. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Or a myth. For example, one party is saying, we are going to explode the Lyndon Johnson myth. And the other party says, we're going to explode the Barry Goldwater myth. It's very important. The myth concept. It's a nice cop-out. Mercury is a myth. Well, I don't know. None of us really do know whether Thor is a myth. I can just imagine many guys in this crowd, 5 minutes after the truck hits, down there in the fiery furnaces of hell, trying to explain it away. You know, I don't believe in this. You're standing there in the furnaces burning. Listen to this. One legend is that the idol threatened centuries ago that if it were ever moved from its resting place, it would bring a gigantic flood to the entire earth. There is a sorehead. There is a guy that really wants security. Now, wait a minute. A cartoonist has pictured the huge monolith in water up to its eyebrows with a caption reading in translation, I told you so. Now, I ask you one thing. Have you noticed how much rain we've had lately here in New York? Now, great stone idol. I just wonder how many of us would vote for a great stone idol if it came down the street. Seriously. And how many of us do vote for great stone idols? Rain gods that promise if they don't get stood on their feet, they'll destroy the world. If they don't get transported from one place to the other, they will send out thunderbolts that will knock Hammond, Indiana right off the map. Well, let me tell you, it's a funny thing, this belief in a strange fate. You know, historically, throughout American history, one party always feels that if the other party's candidate is elected, they are going to go to Australia to live. No, this is always true. I remember guys saying that in 1960. Remember that? I remember guys saying that. I'll never forget sitting in a living room, and a guy is watching Adlai Stevenson give his acceptance speech, and he says, if that guy isn't elected, oh boy, if that other guy's elected, I'm going to Borneo. Borneo, get my hat, I'm ready to go. That guy is living on East 73rd Street right now. And so we always have this thunderbolt myth with us, that if one guy's elected, it's going to be beautiful. If the other guy's not elected, it's going to be thunderstorms. How many of you remember the first election you ever voted in? The first one. I mean, national presidential election. Well, I can remember my first election. I'm a kid, see? And I go into the Army. And I'm underage, very definitely underage, for everything. Which I found out later. I was definitely underage. You know? I mean, Hershey candy bars were very strong stuff. You know? And the next thing you know, you're in the Army, and you find out there's a lot of guys doing a lot of stuff that, you know, you only read about or heard about in rotten books, you know, and all kinds of things. And you're in for a while, and you have a sense of being detached from the world. In the Army, you do. You're detached. You have no connection with the newspapers. You know, you read stories of people. There's always a bunch of nice, friendly people who send you the hometown newspaper. You know, and it says, White Sox drop pair to Senators. Well, you know, nothing's changed. But you read this, and it's like you're reading the news from Saturn. And no connection with the first sergeant down there, you know? No connection at all with the OD. No connection with the supply room down there. Nothing. Your whole world is contained, you see. And they begin then to send me newspapers about the election. There's a big thing going on. And the president was campaigning. Now remember, he was the president of the world that all of us had known. It was our world, you know. This was the only world we knew. He was the president. And this other guy was running. And so guys are walking around, you know, and they're saying things like, gee, you know, once in a while somebody would say something about the election. And nobody really wanted to talk about it. Because it seemed like if this election was lost, thunderbolts would come down and destroy the day room. Yeah. Or a Panzer division would arrive or something, you know, someplace. And so everybody's walking around. And then Yank magazine. Do any of you remember Yank magazine? What a paper. Gee, it was a wild paper. They had some great cartoons. I'll never forget one cartoon of Sad Sack. Do you remember Sad Sack laying in his bunk? In one cartoon, he's lying there, and all of a sudden you see this big smile on his face. He's laying there for about a minute and a half, all three little strips, you know, he's grinning. All of a sudden he jumps up and he's putting on his shoes. He puts on his coat, and he's running down the street, and he gets to this place where they got a green light. It says 2 hours. He just made it. And it was called The Dream. Yeah, you better explain that to her on the way out. Well, this was the kind of paper it was. And then they had an editorial, and it said the GIs in the Army would be allowed to vote. And I had just made it. Just made it. My first election. It said ballots will be distributed by mail and will be sent to the day rooms and to the last command of wherever the armed forces member was stationed. It said, and it went on further, do you remember it? It said that they will take the age and all the statistics from the draft records, and every guy over voting age would get one of these things. And almost every guy I knew had been like 8 years old when he went in the Army, you know. And now all of a sudden here he is. You know, you don't think of yourself as voting age or anything. I suppose when you're a civilian you do. When you're in the Army, you're just in the Army. Everybody's the same age in the Army. They're just all soldiers, you know, all here. And so we began to walk around thinking about this. And then the big day arrived. The first sergeant blew the whistle, and everybody fell out. And the captain is standing up there, and he says, "Men, I suppose you think you've been called out here on some kind of a detail." Yeah. I mean, this was bad news right away. "We have just received the ballots for the presidential election. I hope you guys know what this means. You are all Americans. You have a responsibility to vote.
And I'm not going to tell you how to vote. You hear? And I don't want nobody to say later I told you how to vote.
He's got these two big silver bars.
However, you know who's running, don't you? The president is running. The commander-in-chief. My boss. I like my job. You like your job, huh? Well, let me tell you, everybody in the Army knew, no matter how rotten his job was, there were 50 worse. So when you're knee-deep in the grease pits, your 18th day on KP, you know that there is one step lower. You don't know where it is. You know it. Guys would cling to the worst stuff. All right, now, you got a responsibility to think about this election. Now, Sergeant Scranlin is going to be in the day room to answer any questions about the election campaign. He's going to answer any questions about any political ideas that you may be unclear on. Sergeant Scranlin, by the way, spent all of his time telling us the nomenclature of the M1. He had it all down. He's got this bull neck, and these thick glasses that look like the back ends of these ever-ready spotlights. And so he's standing there smiling. He said, all right, men, you will now be given your ballots. The duty corporal will read out your name. When you get your name, take your ballot and mark. Take it immediately in the day room and talk to the sergeant. He'll clear up all the problems. Any questions? None. And with that, one by one, we each get our little ballot. We open it up. Do you know how exciting it is to get your first ballot? What a sensation. And it has a big return envelope. You seal it in, and you're voting for the President of the United States. And all of a sudden, for that one brief instant, we were all back in that world out there. We really were. It was a strange moment. And all the guys are sort of standing in the company street, you know, in that crummy, rutted, rotten, muddy street. A couple of guys go in their barracks, and 3 or 4 other guys go in the day room. We sort of stand outside a latrine, and I say to Gasser, who are you going to vote for? I don't know. I don't know. Now, I've been a little concerned over rising income taxes. He's getting a cool $16 a month. Less laundry. I mean, and so one by one, we all file past Sergeant Scranlin, who's sitting at the crap table. And he says, any questions? Nope. Each one of us goes in and puts his little mark, folds it up, seals it, hands it to the captain, who is standing there with a loaded .45 to see that nobody tampered with them ballots. We gave each one, and as we went out, the captain says, thank you, American. I'm telling you what he did. Thank you, American, for voting. And we walked out, and each one of us, PFCs, T5,